All right, our second story out front. All the Wisconsin talk overshadowed a crucial vote last night that dealt a serious blow to public unions. Voters slashed pension benefits for government workers in two of America's biggest cities, San Jose and San Diego, California. The fight against unions is going on from coast to coast. It's those cities, and of course, it's Wisconsin. We all know about that place. But now the anti-tax crusader, who Harry Reid once called the most powerful man in Washington, says it's a free day. States need to follow the example set by Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. After Tuesday's results, there came this tweet from the one and only Grover Norquist saying, quote, there are 23 other states with GOP governor, House, and Senate now able to pass Scott Walker's reforms. They know it works and is safe. Grover Norquist is out front tonight. Good to see you, sir. Appreciate it. So let's get straight to it. You said Governor Walker's reforms are, quote unquote, safe. I mean, I have to say this. When I read that, I went, wait a minute. Safe is going through a recall and, you know, wasting $70 to $80 million on a whole recall because you didn't go about it the right way.
Well, I think for a long time, American elected officials wondered whether they could take on the power of public sector unions. What Chris Christie did in New Jersey was showed that you could talk about disagreeing with the teachers union without appearing to be anti-teacher or anti-education. And what Scott Walker pointed out was that you could actually pass reforms which reform public sector unions, which save a lot of money for state and local government. Barrett, the mayor who ran against him, had implemented many of his reforms and saved tens of millions of dollars for the taxpayers that he represented. So it works. It saves money. Public sector jobs and public sector work gets done. And even though the entire public sector union leadership threw money and resources into one state, they still couldn't take one guy and his lieutenant governor out. So it says to other governors, Wisconsin has a history of being very strong for public sector unions. It's a union state in many ways. It's a Democrat liberal state in many ways. So if you're from some other state that's not as left of center as Wisconsin traditionally has been, the ice is thick enough.
All right, so let's talk about one of those states, Ohio. Republican Governor John Kasich, GOP legislature, tried to push through reforms and cuts to pensions and roll back collective bargaining. Yeah. It was a rule in Ohio, went to voters for referendum, and they said no way, and it didn't pass. So it's not quite that easy.
Well, two things. Nobody's lost an election over it in Ohio. What did happen in Ohio, of course, they had a referred question. The campaign on that was insufficiently focused on what Wisconsin did, which is making local government work. So yes, you can still bollocks this issue, and Ohio didn't present it well and didn't raise the resources compared to what the unions did.
But what about the overall point here, Grover? I mean, you look at exit polls in Wisconsin, and you were talking about it yourself. This is a state that goes Democratic. I mean, if it goes Republican, that would be, it would shock almost everybody. No matter who wants to call it purple today, it's still a Democratic state. Right now, voters, according to the exit polls, which I know had their issues, prefer President Obama to Mitt Romney 51 to 44%. So do you think some of these hardline tactics, you know, this kind of my way or the highway, if you don't like it, go jump off a cliff, is not the way to do it?
Well, of course, 4 years ago when Obama ran, he won by twice that margin. So his margin in the state has fallen in half. The state's also passed a voter ID law, which a liberal judge said won't apply to this election. So this is the last election you could show up on Election Day, tell them you're Mickey Mouse, and vote. That can't happen in future elections. So the vote is going to get closer for Obama running at the national level. But I'm actually more interested in what San Jose and San Diego did, reforming the overspending on pensions and benefits, the teacher tenure laws, which allow teachers who've been there 3 years to keep their job forever, regardless of whether they're doing a good job or a bad job. Those are reforms that are moving state by state. And as I pointed out, there are 23 other states that have a Republican governor and legislature, meaning if they sit in a room and say, let's do what Wisconsin did, Texas and Florida, Georgia, big states.
All right, well, let's bring in John Avlon and Roland Martin into the conversation, Grover. And I want on that issue of you got 23 states that would do it. John, let me go straight to you on this, because a lot of people are saying that the vote in Wisconsin maybe wasn't so much about the collective bargaining, but people really saying a recall is supposed to be about did a guy break the law. That a guy do, right? So maybe the vote is not this mandate on collective bargaining or anti-union, and more straight down the middle.
Well, Erin,
about did the guy do something illegal?
Yeah, to that point, I mean, we've had recall fever in this country. In 2011, there were 155 instances of recalls on local races. So I do think that there's generally a rejection of this, and I think it's probably healthy. Recalls ultimately they're not only expensive, they're destabilizing our democracy. It's constantly relitigating elections that you don't like the results of. So that clearly was a part of this.
Right.
But the fact that Walker won with more votes than he did in 2010 also speaks to a certain strength. And then, of course, there was the money differential. You can't discount that.
Roland, what do the Democrats take away from this, though? I mean, I just want to bring up San Jose and San Diego, because I've been watching those over the past few weeks. San Jose had cut its workforce by 25%. They had done all sorts of things that, you know, on a human level, hurt a lot of people's lives because they didn't want to mess with pension promises. But they voted yesterday to go ahead and cut those promises. I mean, this seems to be something that is bipartisan, isn't it?
Well, first of all, when you have a difficult economic time, the public is going to look to anybody to want to be able to blame or to make any kind of adjustments. And keep in mind, when we talk about public workers, people act as if we're talking about only Democrats. There are people who are actually Republican, who are teachers and who are firefighters, who are police officers. And I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind also, especially when you talk about teachers, I have 3 siblings who are teachers, is that typically the payoff for a teacher is going to be that particular pension. Here we are trying to get higher quality folks in the classroom. If you begin to say we're going to cut pensions and we're not going to pay you more on the front end, then we're likely going to lose quality people in the classroom. So we might want to be very careful in terms of how we attack this whole notion of a pension for public workers, because they are sacrificing on the front end to get something on the back end.
But what if you paid them for their performance all the way through? Pay them on the front end if they're good, fire them if they're not.
But first of all, I absolutely believe that if you are not a quality person, you should get fired. But keep in mind, the same people who voted yesterday are the same folks who don't want to pay more right now. And so at some point, they're going to have to figure out, where do I stand on this? And the rubber's going to meet the road somewhere.
But I mean, really, the votes in San Jose and San Diego are in some ways even more significant than Wisconsin, because it happens in California. It's not a narrow margin, it's a 70% margin. People saying, a Democratic mayor of San Jose saying, look, our pension costs have tripled in the last decade. We're spending $250 million and a quarter of our budget on pensions. We can't afford that. And people across the political aisle spectrum say, you know what, that's right. This is unreasonable. These are deals made decades ago, and they kicked the can to us, and now we can't afford it. We need the freedom to make fiscally responsible adjustments.
Grover, would you say when you hear that, though, this is something that makes you think, look, I don't want to be the standard bearer for the Republican Party. I admire what a lot of these Democrats are doing. When you admire the Democrats?
Well, I think you've got some Democrats who are put in a very difficult position, which is one of the most important funding bases for the Democratic Party is organized labor. And they take union dues, particularly public sector unions. They take union dues out of the paychecks of teachers. In Wisconsin, it was $1,000 per teacher taken by the union and then spent on various things. One of the things that was done in Wisconsin...
all I'm saying is, wouldn't you say then that these Democratic mayors, governors who are taking on this issue are all the more courageous? The Republican guys aren't getting these donations. That's not that hard to take them on.
No, they are being courageous, and they've been put in a situation where the public sector unions and their demands are bankrupting whole cities. They have to do this. You're even seeing Rahm Emanuel in Chicago begin to have some of these efforts. This has to happen. It's bankrupting cities, states. Government can't work with these sorts of costs that are being imposed on it, and this is happening, but slowly. I mean, it should happen 10 years ago.
All right, Grover, thanks very much. Got to leave it there. I'm sorry, Roland. John, Roland will be back tomorrow. Thanks to both of you. John, too.